We know that being healthy requires much more than just having access to good medical care. Increasingly, we know that one's individual health is impacted by the health of the community in which that person lives, learns, works, plays, and prays. Healthy communities provide people the opportunity to be healthy. But what determines a healthy community? From research studies and from our own personal experiences, we know that the healthiest communities have good access to high quality, safe, and affordable housing, good transportation systems, recreation and open space, healthy foods, economic opportunity, safe neighborhoods, good schools, and a clean environment. We also know that these community characteristics don't happen by accident. They are usually the result of good planning and the implementation of wise public policies. The Twin Cities metropolitan area is considered one of the healthiest communities in the United States. That reputation is due in great part to the work of the Metropolitan Council, whose mission is to foster efficient economic growth for a prosperous metropolitan region. Because the Metropolitan Council has such a major role in improving and protecting health, we'll be focusing on the work of the Met Council on today's episode of A Public Health Journal. Please stay tuned.
Welcome to A Public Health Journal, a program that explores public health issues facing our society today and tomorrow. The host of the show is Dr. Ed Ellinger, Commissioner of Health for the state of Minnesota. A Public Health Journal is sponsored by the Minnesota Department of Health and the Hennepin County Human Services and Public Health Department, all working together towards the goal of healthy people living in healthy communities.
Welcome to A Public Health Journal. Today we're going to talk about the Metropolitan Council, the regional policy-making body, the planning agency, and the provider of essential services for the Twin Cities metropolitan region. The Council's mission is to foster efficient economic growth for a prosperous metropolitan region. In multiple ways, its work has a tremendous impact on the health of the public. Joining me in this discussion is Adam Duininck, the chair of the Metropolitan Council. Adam is the 14th chair of the council since its creation by the legislature in 1967. He is also the first full-time chair, which recognizes the importance and the amount of effort needed to keep the Twin Cities metropolitan area one of the safest, healthiest, and best places to live in the country. Adam, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Commissioner. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and it's, I keep thinking about all of the commissioners and all of the people in Dayton's cabinet and how each one of them really impacts health, be it corrections or education or human services or public safety, all have an impact on health. But certainly the Metropolitan Council has a huge impact on the health of the Twin Cities area. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, but I want to get some background. Like I said in my introduction, the Metropolitan Council was formed in 1967. Why did it come about?
It was actually a reaction to a public health crisis at the time. There was wastewater leakage in a number of lakes around the region, and the region came together and said, instead of looking at these issues local by local, city by city, county by county, we need to take a regional approach to our wastewater system, and how do we plan for that? And so that was actually the basis and the foundation for the creation of the Met Council.
Now, is the Metropolitan Council a unique entity? Do other metropolitan areas have similar things like the Met Council?
It is pretty unique. There are components of the Met Council that are similar in other regions. It's for us in the Twin Cities, it's a planning organization as well as an operating organization. It operates systems such as our wastewater system and our transit system. A lot of other regions around the country have those things in silos. They have a transit authority or a wastewater commission. And the council when it was first formed in '67, existed in that way. There was just the wastewater component, the planning agency component, and the transit authority. And then in 1994, when the reorganization occurred and a new legislative package was passed to reorganize the Met Council, it merged all of those things into one entity known as the Metropolitan Council.
And so, I'm a commissioner and you're a chair. What's the difference? Why are you a chair and not a commissioner?
That's a good question. I think it speaks to the fact that the council is a little bit of a different entity. It's similarly situated like the MAC, the Metropolitan Airports Commission. It's not quite a state agency, but it's considered a cabinet level position. The chair of the Met Council has always been considered that. But I think it speaks to the fact that we're not quite a state agency, but we're also not a local unit of government. We're kind of somewhere in between.
Okay, oh, good. Well, good to have you as part of the cabinet because you're adding a lot to that conversation. And so what do you do as the chair? What's your responsibility in running the Metropolitan Council?
There's a number of areas that I have to focus. One is to be a member of the cabinet and feel as though I'm a part of the governor's administration and represent him around the region in the work that we do. I also have a council of other Met Council members made up of 16 board members that they represent a geographic part of the region. And so we have both a committee structure and regular meeting schedule where we move business items and move through the business of the council. And I think another way to think about it, at least the way that our regional administrator talks about it, it's kind of a city, you could think of it as maybe a city government model where the administrator is kind of like the city manager and the chair is kind of like the mayor and the face of the organization, running the council, running the meetings, representing the council on corridors that we're developing when we're talking about transit ways, representing us publicly as we work on issues related to wastewater and housing and other issues, parks. But that's a big picture that's kind of the bigger picture piece of it. And I'm also kind of the CEO of the enterprise of the organization itself, so leading by example is something that I think is an important role that I play in council.
So you mentioned some of the things that you deal with. Just kind of run through the major areas that you play a role in. Certainly wastewater treatment, transit. What are some of the other things that the Met Council is engaged in?
Sure, it's those are I think the four principal issues are parks, regional housing, transit, and transportation in general, but certainly with a bend towards transit in that we operate the system, and then wastewater. And those are kind of the four main areas in the work that we do. Again, as a part of the reorganization in '94, some of them were put together, and so some of the work that we do is a little bit newer that way. And then some of our work too is very clearly laid out in statute how much authority we have and how much we don't have as a regulator of these regional systems. We put forward policy plans around all these systems. We do that every 4 years, but we also have what's called a 10-year regional framework plan that we do for the entire region. That's sort of a bigger picture plan, and then underneath that, the systems plans exist for water, for housing, for parks, and for transportation.
And my guess is you have to really balance sort of the large metropolitan needs with also local needs and local concerns. How do you do that? I know you have representation from all of the areas within the metropolitan area, but how do you get that input from the locals to make sure that the local needs are met while you're also doing the larger metropolitan needs?
That is you just explained probably the single biggest challenge of this job, and it's also a major role that the chair plays. And we have to both be responsive to and be listening to the local communities while balancing a regional approach to some of these policy issues. And that never comes without some tension. When we're talking about regional standards for housing or regional expectations for housing or wastewater or transportation, a lot of communities view that as, well, that just is a one-size-fits-all approach. So we have to think about how can we be responsive to communities and accountable to them while also asking communities to do more from a regional perspective, because that's what we expect as a region in terms of our needs and in terms of planning for the future.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, I want to talk about some of the specific areas, transportation, parks, wastewater, but first we need to take a little break.
All right.
So we'll be back right after this message.
What's coming out of the tailpipe of a bus today has less emissions, it's actually cleaner than the air you breathe walking down the Nicollet Mall.
I use the bus for work, taking my son to daycare. We go see friends, family. You can get to city to city if you don't have a car, you know. It's one of the best ways to get around these days, besides the light rail.
In 1926, there's a survey that's often been referred to that evaluated what fish there were between Red Wing, Minnesota and Lock and Dam up here in the Twin Cities, and at that time they only found 3 fish in that entire stretch. And today we know the story is much different. There's been a dramatic resurgence, and fish anglers talk about the trophy fish that they can catch now on that stretch of the region.
The value of clean water is it's so important, and I think that a lot of people are really considering how important clean water, especially clean drinking water, how important that is going to be in the coming 50 years.
The millennial generation, for example, is very much keyed into sustainability. And so when we can talk about being able to move around the metropolitan area in an environmentally conscious and responsible way, that resonates with the next generation of our users.
They make getting around so much easier, so much more environmentally friendly.
The work that our treatment plant operators do to clean up the water to prevent waterborne diseases has more impact than any other significant medical discovery or improvement.
Countries that there isn't clean water, it's a huge problem to the population, to health and survivability in general.
Water is essential to life.
In partnership with environmental services, Metro Transit really is in the lead in the industry in being environmental good stewards.
Welcome back. We're talking about the Metropolitan Council and the impact that the Met Council has on public health in the metropolitan area with Adam Duininck, the chair of the Met Council. Adam, one of the things that I think most people recognize about the Twin Cities is that it has great recreational facilities. It's got great parks, great bikeways and walking paths. What's the role that the Metropolitan Council plays in that metropolitan kind of recreation, outdoor recreation system?
Sure, we work with the park agencies in the region. Some are represented by counties, and there's Three River Park District, which represents a bigger geographic area than the county. Minneapolis, St. Paul, the bigger cities have their own park agencies. We work with them in planning as well as funding the priorities of the region there as well. So we work with them on the parks plan every 4 years, and we're advocates with them at the legislature for more resources for funding or for parks, both from a capital side as well as from a program and operation side.
So what do you think about when you plan parks? Is it just the numbers, the quality, the kind of services that are provided? What are the things that go into thinking about parks in a metropolitan region?
Yeah, it's a balancing act, I would say. I mean, on the one hand, when the Met Council was formed, part of the reason for the formation was to think about preservation of open space. And as we're going to develop and have housing and jobs and industry and all these things in the region, how do we make sure we set aside enough land that there's parks for the future growth that we expect? We're at a point now where we feel like there probably is a lot of open space set aside, and now I think part of our role needs to be thinking about thoughtful, again, operations, parks departments, their needs from a perspective of having programs that attract people, that invite people in. I feel like we've had enough. We've spent a lot of resources on building the parks up. Now we need to fill them with the activities it takes to really create that kind of vibrancy that a community deserves.
Okay. Now on the other side, those are very visible, but a lot of things that people don't have, like we saw in that little video, is the wastewater treatment. Mm-hmm. People just expect it. It's not something that they pay attention to all the time. Tell us a little bit about how that came about, how that's organized, what you do to really make sure that we get rid of our waste, we have clean water, we have good sewage system, because that's probably one of the most important public health things that you do.
It, without question is, and a couple observations that I have about the wastewater system in this region. One is it's one of the least expensive regional wastewater treatment systems in the country and in the world. And that's a huge competitive advantage for us to help businesses locate here, to help keep rates low for our consumers. It plays a role in how cities and counties set their budgets, knowing what the impacts of the wastewater fees are and that they're as low as they are. It's a real competitive advantage. And then secondly, we have some of the most first-rate technology employed in some of these plants as well. I've visited 3 or 4 of them already. I plan to see the rest of them this summer. And the technology that's used is again, best in class, first in the world. in terms of cleaning up the water that the wastewater that we treat, and then the water that we actually take into our plants is cleaner than the water running into our rivers and into our streams right now, but we're able to discharge that back into the environment, and it's a huge benefit to the region from a livability and public health standpoint.
Well, I know, I mean, a lot of the sewer systems are hundreds of years old, and infrastructure is always a concern. How do you keep up with the infrastructure needs and the technology issues that really are different from inner cities, which are much older than the suburbs? That must be a huge challenge to try to keep this system up and running with some equipment that's very old and some that's relatively new.
It really is, and it also becomes a geographic challenge because in how we've grown our system has always been the model of, well, growth should pay for growth. And so where there's parts of the region that are expanding and growing and doing well economically, then the fees and some of the service fees that we charge will help pay for that. But there's also been a significant amount of redevelopment in this region over the last number of years. And so certain parts of the region would say to us at the council, well, wait a minute, we've already paid for this infrastructure. Why do we have to keep paying for it? But that's kind of the nature of public infrastructure in general, whether you're talking about transportation, roads and bridges, whether you're talking about wastewater system. There's a balance of how do we pay for these very necessary investments. I'll also say, since our system is aging, we've had challenges here and there where there's either lines that break or refurbishing of lines that we need to do. That's an important part of our investment plan, is how do we maintain what we have? So we try to start there. We say, how do we maintain the infrastructure we have before we expand it? And again, looking at our 30-year development plan for the region, it doesn't appear as though we're going to need more wastewater treatment plants. We have 8 now. It seems like that should hold us capacity-wise for quite some time.
Great. And I know that transportation is sort of the sweet spot for you. That's one of the reasons you were looking at taking this position as chair of the Met Council. And certainly, again, that's one of the visible things. What are the challenges that our metropolitan area, which is growing, but also now we know that it's certainly increasing in the inner cities, which is a unique turn of events. What are the transportation challenges that you see?
Oh, that would take me a long time to run through them all, but I would say a couple things that come to mind. One is that we, again, like a lot of our challenges, we have diverse needs in the region where in the inner core of the region, there's certainly high transit needs, high needs for looking at biking and pedestrian investments to keep up with the growth in trip patterns and travel behavior that's occurred in this region. But then in the outlying parts of the region, there's certainly needs for road investments as well. And so they're trying to manage the distinct nature of those needs is one challenge. There's always just a funding shortfall challenge as well, is how do we keep running a world-class transit service? I believe we have a really strong service here that provides well during commuting time. It runs on time very efficiently. There's a very good return on what's called the fare box recovery. So in terms of the subsidy, is pretty low. But how do we expand that system so that people that want to take trips going to a movie on the weekend or going to the grocery store, that people can be more transit dependent? I think that's that's kind of a big crossroads we're at in this region about where we're going to be in terms of transit investments.
Yeah. And I hear that as the millennials age and become a bigger part of our infrastructure, our population, that they really are looking more towards public transportation as part of their lifestyle. Is that being part of your planning on the changing demographics?
That is, and it's created some of the tension in the region about our investments, but I think it's important to note that over the last 15 years, we've seen transit use increase between 20 and 30%. We've seen walking trips and bicycling trips increase by 15 to 20%, whereas we've seen vehicle miles traveled on our roads actually flatline and decline a little bit. And part of that is that our workforce is now fully saturated. There's not an increase in miles traveled because of women entering the workforce. They're pretty much fully entered into the workforce. So some of these long historical patterns that have driven transportation investments have kind of leveled off. And as you talked about the millennials, they're making the choice of either wanting to drive less or think about a family getting by with 1 car instead of 2. And I think from a multiple standpoints, namely a regional competitive standpoint, we need to really have a serious conversation about how are we going to make those investments in this region to remain competitive.
All right, good. Well, I want to talk particularly about the increasing diversity in our state, and particularly in the metropolitan region, and what the Met Council is doing to address that diversity, but we'll need to take another little break. So I'll be back right after this message.
They said a bottle was just a bottle. That no one would ever notice me. But I knew I could be more. That one day, I would make people smile.
Welcome back. We're talking about the role of the Metropolitan Council in improving the health of the people in the Twin City metropolitan area. We're talking with Adam Duininck, who's the chair of the Met Council. Adam, when I moved to the Twin Cities in 1980, Minnesota had a population of 2% people of color and American Indians statewide. It's now up to about 18, 19%. And in the metropolitan area, we're really much higher than that, probably 25% people of color and American Indians. And the demographics are really changing dramatically. So that must have a huge impact on the planning that you do for a metropolitan area like the Twin Cities. So how do you deal with the increasing diversity? We talked a little bit about the millennials, but we're also having a huge change in racial ethnic makeup. And so how does that go into the planning that the Metropolitan Council is doing and kind of the work that you're doing?
That's a great question. It's a big part of the work that we're doing, and one of the things that we learned when we did our 30-year regional plan, in taking a look at census data and demographic data that we anticipate the future of this region to look like, two things really jumped out at us. One is we're going to have a significant aging population, and the second, which is the point you mentioned, is our region is going to continue to get to be more and more diverse. We're going to have upwards of 40 to 50% people of color in this region, and that's a significant amount of the new growth that's going to occur in this region too, will be the increased amount of people of color. I think we work with that. We also work with the issue of equity on a number of fronts. One is in how we do our public outreach and stakeholder engagement. It's something that means a lot to me, and I know it meant a lot to the former chair, Sue Hagg, too, to make equity an important priority of her work at the council. We work as hard as we can to include people on the policy plans we do work on, to include them on the corridor planning and the investment work that's happening in the region. And how do we ask communities of color to invite them in and give them a seat at the table when it comes to decision making? Mm-hmm.
And I know certainly in my world, we look at disparities, health disparities, a lot of huge health disparities. But we also look at disparities in home ownership. Whites have a home ownership of about 75%, African Americans really about 20%. Education disparities that we see, and certainly access to transportation, that mobility is really markedly impaired. How are you going to try to, I know you do a lot of work on housing and a lot of work on transportation. How do you try to balance those, and how do you to make it much more equitable, knowing that local cities and counties have some other issues that they may want to deal with? It must be a huge challenge.
It is a huge challenge. It's been met with resistance at times. We've taken a look at our housing policy plan and how do we use that to help communities plan for the affordable housing need in the region. We've also taken a look at how we interact with the Transportation Advisory Board, the TAB. It makes up the other part of the Metropolitan Planning Organization that we do transportation planning together with. And we've looked at how we can integrate equity into some of both the planning and financial decision making that those bodies make up. And I think that's an important step. But I also think when it comes to equity, I think the motto that I've always tried to talk about is it's not about how we do the least amount of damage to communities, but how do we actually empower them to how do we lift up communities. And if we talk about it in those terms, I think we've been able to, at least at the council, have some success in bringing cities and counties along and understanding the importance. It's really about the future of the region. If we have these disparities, if they continue, looking at our 30-year plan, if they continue, we're going to continue to be known as having some of the worst disparities in the country.
Yeah, and certainly leading to that, the Twin Cities area is one of the most segregated communities in the country. I mean, we used to be, I think, number 1 or number 2. I think we've gotten better, but and that's always controversial. That's an issue. How do you have those conversations in a way that is productive to say, we need to address the issue of segregation and of isolation in our community in a way that everybody is around the table talking about it?
That's a real big challenge. I think for us, we've tried to take a real leadership role in talking about fair housing and how do we take the tools that are afforded to us under the legislative authority that we have. Again, they're typically on issues like this. There's advocates on one side saying you're not doing enough. You need to really do more, push harder, Met Council, and then you have other folks on the other spectrum saying, hold on a second here, Met Council. You don't have the authority to do that. You can't make cities or counties or locals do something. So it's a real balancing act of how do we try to work with all the constituencies to move the region forward. But I think it comes back to some of the impacts and some of the results that we're seeing. And if we don't change those, we're going to, in 10 and 20 and 30 years from now, really be regretting some of the policy decisions we've made in this region if we don't fix that.
Yeah. Well, it's obvious to me as the health commissioner that you do a whole lot of public health activities. So thank you for partnering with that. And certainly as we talked a little bit about all of the things you do, I'm really glad that you're now a full-time employee.
Me too.
Because it is a full-time job to try to make this continue to make Minnesota or the Twin Cities area the healthiest local metropolitan area in the country. So thanks for your work.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And I'll be back with a closing comment right after this message.
You know what, guys? There's a lot of tree branches and dry brush over here. We should probably move the bonfire over there.
I'm guessing Smokey liked that idea.
Over the next several years, you may be hearing the phrase health in all policies. What this means is that every policy, whether it's federal, state, or local, has an impact on health. Health in all policies recognizes that health is not just the responsibility of our medical care system, doctors, nurses, hospitals, and clinics. It highlights the fact that the health of individuals is greatly impacted by the quality of the environment, economic vitality, successful schools, mobility, and the safety and security of housing, to name just a few of the things that determine our health. Health in all policies recognizes that the health of individuals is impacted by the health of the community in which people live, learn, work, play, and pray. And the health of the community is affected by the policies that determine how the community is organized, protected, maintained, and serviced. Good policies help us have a vibrant economy. The greatest determinant of health is the economy. Good policies help us have clean air, safe water, good schools, efficient transportation systems, affordable housing, and a secure food supply. Healthcare is important to health, but the greatest determinants of health are the social, economic, and environmental conditions of our communities, conditions that are affected by public policies. Public health is defined as what we as a society do collectively to assure the conditions in which people can be healthy. This means that all of us have to get involved to assure those health-enhancing conditions. And since there is health in all policies, and because public policies have the greatest impact on the conditions that determine our health, it is our collective responsibility to assure that those policies are developed in a way that enhances health. So take a policymaker to lunch. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. I hope you can join us again next time on A Public Health Journal.